I'd like to call the afternoon session of the Committee on Accreditation to order. We have gone through this agenda very efficiently, and that brings us to item 18, which is the update and discussion of survey data in accreditation. Director Terry Clark will present this information. Ms. Clark, will you begin, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon. So this agenda item provides a link for you right at the top to the survey webpage. And the survey webpage is where we post all the surveys so that any institution who wants to see what the survey is, they can look at it and they can see all the survey questions. It's where we post the statewide reports, which give the statewide responses for each of the questions. And we have just updated it in the last 2 weeks so that it is updated for the information from the 16-17 year. So that's one thing. Then in the item itself, what we do is we provide you a link to each of the 6 completer surveys. We'll still have 6 completer surveys this coming year, but the surveys will be a little different because if you notice right now we have numbers 5 and 6 are clear gen education completers versus clear education specialist completers. There will be a teacher induction there instead. But we were opening up and starting the administrator induction survey this year. So there'll be a 6th survey for the Clear Administrative Services programs. They just started their induction programs 2 years ago, and the first of their completers will be finishing this coming spring. So there will still be 6 completer surveys. We also have a master teacher survey. The completer surveys and the master teacher survey are all running on a year cycle now. They open September 1st, they close August 31st. For the completers, they get the information as they go to pay for their recommendation. And so we've had really good response rates, as you'll see in this item. For the master teachers, we send the link to the survey out to the programs, and we ask them to distribute the survey link when they have master teachers who are working with candidates in their final student teaching experience. And prior years, we only did this in the spring, but starting this year, we've now opened it early. Every program already has the link, and we will resend it after the first of the year in 2018 and remind them again to send it to their cooperating teachers for when people are completing their final student teaching. The employer survey is done in a little different format. The employer survey opens in the fall, and it's open through mid-December. It's just a short time frame, and we do our employer survey here at the Commission a little different than how the other employer surveys, especially the CSU survey, is done. We don't actually ask an employer to respond about a specific candidate. We instead ask an employer to respond about a program if they've hired at least 2 completers from that program. Last year, our response rate was not super great. We had, it says in the item exactly how many, but we already have this year, does it really say 1,800? No, that can't be 1,800 responses. That would be impressive. It was already 1,800. But we have already, I'm looking this up really quickly to get you the most current and accurate information. We had about 700. The system is now telling me 1,054. So it's a good number. So we are above the total number we got last year already, even though it's been a fairly short time frame. And those surveys are also available for programs. They can look at what the survey questions are. Then you'll see down on the second page there that we have the response rates. And we gave you the historical response rates and then the 16-17 response rates. And we are just so thrilled about this. We had really low response rates. People got an email, they got invited to go do the survey. Starting with the 16-17 year, about a year ago this time, we worked with some contractors and we embedded the survey right into the recommendation system. So they get an email and it takes them to the survey. They can decline. We very clearly say this survey is to provide feedback about your program. Please do not decline. We'd like you to do the survey. And this year, clearly somewhere between 92.8% up to a high of 96.9% of the completers did the survey. So what this is doing is it's telling institutions they actually are getting reports that are really meaningful this year. I was talking with a dean when I was down in San Diego with the Cal APA work, and she was just giddy with the fact that she has meaningful data that is representing enough of her completers that she can actually take it back to her institution and say, what are we going to do about some of this information? So that was really exciting. Now we're to the part where we need the COA to help us do some thinking, the use of the survey data in the accreditation process. We definitely want to be able to do some things where we say, okay, so you have really positive completer feedback. What does this mean? And do you still need to bring completers in or not? So say they have 96% of their completers responded. Do they need to bring any of those people in if they have a visit the right next year? You have feedback from 96% of them. Maybe they need to bring people from 2 or 3 years ago, but maybe you don't need to worry about bringing in last year's completers. Same thing with master teachers. We actually asked the institution separately to give us the total number of master teachers who have worked with culminating student teaching. And then we calculate a response rate for master teachers. If the response rate is really up there and the feedback is all very, very positive, do institutions need to bring master teachers in? We'd like to have you talk about that a little bit today. Because what we're going to point out is if fewer people are coming in for interviews, you're going to see some lower numbers in the interview totals. We identified in here that we want, and we've asked consultants to work with their teams to really identify when you're taking something from a survey, actually identify that in the narrative. Survey responses show blank, 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 and blank. Just the same way they would say, cite supervisor's report from interviews. Survey data is valid data to be able to use in this process. And then on top of that, Cheryl and I have this goal, but we're not sure how quickly we're going to be able to get there, but we have this goal for actually being able to set some thresholds. So I picked a couple examples out of here. So let's take the example on page 3. We have some, how often were you observed by your programmatic supervisor? And we have multiple subject, single subject education specialist, and we have some information here. That is the statewide data that came through the survey. Let's say, for example, a specific institution had 60-some% of their people were saying once or twice or 3 to 5 times. That seems like it should highlight to all of us. We should know, wait a minute, that seems so far out of what everyone else is saying. We don't want, and so we want to talk with you and get some thought from you on maybe some ideas for thresholds or flags when something would notify us automatically. We have some similar things for clear credential programs, lower there on page 3. We have statewide information for each of these things, when they were hired and when did they start their program, when did you start working with a support provider. I'm not really happy with those 2.4% and 3.1% who said I was never assigned a support provider. And it very much seems that if you go to an induction program and that percentage in the induction program is any higher than the state average, we want the team to investigate that. So we were just trying to illustrate for you how these survey questions could help point the site visit team members into certain areas. We wanted to kind of get your thinking on that, any feedback you had. We also, because we had such a high response rate, our rule has historically been a rule of 10. You only get a survey report if you have at least 10 completers. There were a lot of people this year in programs that had fewer than 10. And I was like, oh, this is so sad. So really one of the things that took a little longer to get the reports out is we were negotiating inside, what could we do if there are fewer than 10? And the rule we came up with, as long as there's 5, if 100% of them responded, you get your data. So if you have 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 completers and 100% of those people responded, you still are going to get that data. So that's one of the things that slowed down getting reports out. So our rule is a little more complex now. You'll get your data as long as there's 10, or if there's 5 to 9 and 100% of them did complete the survey, you get that report. So that means a whole bunch of institutions that did not get reports in the past are now getting reports on their programs because they only got the statewide report. On that very first page where we talked about the survey website, if you go to the survey website, there's actually 2 files kind of in the middle of the page where you can see the survey response rates by program. We have all the preliminary programs in one PDF from Excel, and we have all the clear programs in another PDF. And if you click on either of those, you can actually see if it's completely blank, that institution doesn't offer that specific program. Whereas if there's a red asterisk, they did not get a report. So I'm looking at the preliminary one right now, and for example, the Academy of Art only had 4 program completers. Therefore, they have 2 red asterisks. They did not get a report. Whereas other institutions, there was, okay, so Chapman University had 8 completers in their multiple subject program, and all 8 of them did the survey, so they got that report. Whereas Claremont Graduate had 8 completers, but only 7 did it, so Claremont Graduate isn't going to get that report on their program. And then on top of that, we are preparing another survey. There'll be one more completer survey, and the purpose of that additional completer survey is for all the programs that don't have their own completer survey. So your special education added authorization programs, your PPS programs, your school nurse, your teacher librarian. And we're talking right in here that we're going to have not very many questions, but questions about things that are common across programs, such as how clear was the application process, how clear the clarify. Oh gosh, I was writing this item. I apologize. I wrote these items really fast. This is not grammatically correct in this item. The clarity of the credential requirements, the faculty and if they're knowledgeable, how well the coursework and the field work integrated together, how well they feel they prepared at the time of program completion. Because we know there's a lot of other programs that you guys are operating, and having a survey at least could be helpful for them. That's kind of the highlight of the survey world. I've got a couple staff members that work with me on this all the time. They don't actually staff COA. So Mike Taylor, Marjorie Suko, Nadia Allen, they're not actually down here. But so that's kind of why I get to bring you all this information. But they're helping me with all this survey work. Questions or thoughts?
One question about the new surveys that you're talking about. Will there be any for the bilingual authorization?
The bilingual authorization would be included in this new generic survey, and the candidate who is also completing a multiple subject or a single subject or an ed specialist, of course, would do that survey. So yes, bilingual authorization people will be included in this new common survey.
And then if I could follow up with that, so like logistically, when they log on to pay for their credentials, first they'll see the screen that's the primary credential, the teaching credential, the multiple subjects, for example, right? Then they would go to pay for the bilingual authorization, and they'd see that one separately. I'm just thinking of survey fatigue.
We're going to have to work that out, but yes, we can make it do that.
Thanks.
Any general questions before we kind of go back to talk about some of the specific topics? Hi, Anna. What's up?
I had 2 questions for you. Oh, okay, sure. Committee Member Pensaval.
So, Terry, with the larger response rate, have you seen any change in the data that you've collected in any kind of significant way? Not statistically significant, but just significant?
In general, the statewide data really looks pretty positive. You can go to that survey webpage and you can see all the statewide reports. In general, they're fairly positive. A lot of people are giving really pretty positive feedback. What happens is when you go to each individual institution, then you can actually see. So like I'm looking right now the multiple subject statewide data. There are definitely questions that have lower response rates than we would like, or people are not as happy about the program. But the statewide just kind of gives us a sense of everybody. And so really it would take us going into each and every one of those, and we haven't had time to do that yet. So we have not done that.
Committee Member Alvarado.
So my question is with the thinking on small programs, and I understand that the lower numbers, there's less confidence in the results, but at the same time, I think we need to be careful that we don't punish small programs by not giving them the data. So if you're talking about a small program that has 5 completers and 4 complete, that's 80% response rate. That's a really high response rate. Understanding that, maybe you can put an asterisk or something, but to say it that they're not getting it because it's less than 5, I think is not going to be helpful for some programs.
I completely understand that, and that is one of the reasons we held the reports back a while, and I got us down to, we were comfortable with 5 at 100%. The concern is if there's under 10, we don't give feedback on the demographic. And so if we don't give demographic, I may be able to get the agency to agree to go to a smaller number. The other thing we can do, though, is aggregate across years. We have to do it separately and manually, but for a small institution that had 4 completers this year and 3 completers this year, if we get to 7 across 2 years, we can get them a report for those 2 years. So that's something we can do. So I'm grappling with this just as you are, because we don't want to release inappropriate data, but we do want to get information to programs.
I was in deep thought about the use of this survey data.
I'm a good student.
Committee member Forbes.
And along those lines, I think it's really critical. As an institution who has one program that has usually 3 to 4 people enrolled, we'll probably never even be able to hit 5. And yet it's certainly useful to us as a program. And as we just saw in the most recent site visit report that we heard about, some programs have very few candidates in the entire program. And so the teams are going to need access to that data to make team decisions too.
The teams can get access to that data. So we will make sure, because we have a report, even though we don't put it out, the teams will have access to the data, even though there's fewer than, which means I have to get that into the programs. You're right. I've got to figure this out. I'll keep working on it.
Can I ask a question? So I just thought of this as we were talking about small numbers, but I know that the concern about small numbers has always been that the institution can identify those candidates. Right. But if they're completers, they're no longer in the program. Is there harm that's being done to those completers? I just raised the question. I don't know that it's the same thing as a candidate giving feedback. I don't know.
Only if it's the employer survey. I mean, if they can identify people who do the employer survey, that's of concern. But otherwise, I agree with you.
So, Terry, I heard a question about it not requiring 100%. So, to me, if the demographic data is gone, you could have well below 100%, and it would be difficult for someone to discern who it is.
Let me take this up and we'll work through this, and if we can do that, we will. We'll get out additional reports.
I had a couple comments. One, I appreciate that there's going to be more data that we can use in that new component of the Common Standards in Common Standard 5. I think that's great. I looked at that and I was like, okay, what can I use here to address the effectiveness? So this is a great source of data for us. Also on page 3 above the table that says how often were you, the last sentence says this can assist in identifying best practices that other programs can consider, which is fabulous. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on how and when will these best practices be shared with other institutions.
That would assume that we're not reading grant proposals. Right now, all the staff in PSD and staff outside of PSD in our building are really busy reading grant proposals. So our goal is we have to get in and figure this out. So I think one of the things we could start doing as an idea is we could ask consultants as they work with institutions for site visits if they're seeing something that, whoa, this institution is doing this really well in their data, if they would help identify it for Cheryl and we could therefore start to pull it together. We can clearly develop some web pages with resource. We can clearly do this. It's just a matter of we got to move it forward. Yeah, time.
Committee member Alvarado.
So I think the commission has done a wonderful job in collaborating with the CSU to make sure that efforts aren't duplicated and we're not just saturating our partners with surveys. And I know that we've done that with our preliminary credential programs. I wonder if a similar effort could be made with regards to master teachers, because now they're getting multiple, and so it's something to think about. I know that on behalf of the CSU, I've checked with Chancellor's office, and they're very open to that idea. and also the Center for Teacher Quality is also, Dr. Paul Tuss is also interested in collaborating on that. So maybe we can continue this conversation.
We are happy to do that. I didn't include it in here, but the CSU campuses don't actually, their completers don't go through the same process. Their completers are actually taken to the CSU survey. They have the same questions we have, and CSU ships us all the data at the close of the time. So on September 1st, we get all the data from the CSU survey, and we add it to our system to run the reports. We'd be happy to work with you as far as with CSU as far as a master teacher survey. We can definitely do that.
Committee Member Ricks?
So I'm just wondering about how they're overwhelmed, the master teachers, because they would only have, am I misthinking this? Because they'd only have one, right?
So it has to do with the fact that they're getting a request to complete a survey from the CTC, but a very similar survey from the CSU. So it's basically, we should be coordinating. So they just basically get one.
And it could go either way. We could